as you all are knowing that there is a psychoanalysis as a psychoanalytic therapy, and a lot of misconceptions are around that. A lot of people feel that psychoanalysis is something which is giving only a lot of importance to past, right? So, Miss Leah, would you like to tell us, or would you like to let us know something more about this new approach of psychoanalysis, right? And what is psychoanalytic approach and how it could be different from even psychodynamic approach?
Okay. So where do I even begin? I'm thinking
Over to you. So you are.
it's been over 100 years, which is very little in the time span, really, that psychoanalysis even was something that was not even known. Okay. And what happened many years ago, if we go back to Austria in Europe, in Vienna, there was a lot going on back then. We didn't have videos. We didn't have texting. We didn't have cars that were available to everybody. We didn't even have electricity or ways of communicating like the telephone that was a given. And people lived close together. Families lived close together, very close together. And Vienna is where Freud lived. And it was a time where culture was really changing. Vienna was like an imperialistic city filled with music and culture, and people were changing. But if you think about the fashion then and the way life was, okay, people walked places. People went to the corner to do their shopping. They knew their neighbors. The dress was very different, okay? And the symptoms of that time that people had were very different in many ways. They were more severe than they are today, okay? When somebody was ill mentally, as they would say, okay, it was more psychotic than it was neurotic. Okay? And what I mean by that is that when somebody like Dora had symptoms of hysteria, okay, it wasn't just hysterical, like screaming or whatever. It was paralysis. It was hallucinations. It was the inability to really function every single day, going outside and communicating with other people, or just plain eating. Okay. And so people in those days did not talk to each other about problems. Somebody like Dora would have been institutionalized in an asylum and tried many different forms of treatment, such as electroshock therapy or lobotomy, or isolated from the community because their behavior was so incongruent with the behavior at that time. Okay. And then along comes this young doctor, Freud, okay, who was a neurologist. And he was a little more curious about how to be with people who had these symptoms,
Right.
and who couldn't function. And so he looked at it in terms of, okay, how do we treat? Do we treat with cocaine? Because he started to deal with cocaine. Then he started to volunteer in an asylum, and he tried hypnosis, you know, to get people under and see what their problem was. Maybe with hypnosis, something would get revealed as to why they're so incongruent with their behavior and their thoughts and their feelings. And hypnosis worked for a bit. He studied with Charcot in France. But what would happen is the symptoms would return. So when somebody was completely unconscious, the symptoms would subside, but they would return when the person was conscious. So he thought he would try something called the talking therapy. Actually, one of his patients called it the talking cure, which was Anna O. Okay. And so what would happen is with talking, okay, he said people can free associate. And what psychoanalysis was, is it's a process, it's a verb. And so what would happen is he said, if we delve into our unconscious, okay, we will uncover what the conflicts are or what the trauma was that created this inability to keep functioning. Okay. His belief is that everybody has a life force, and that our life force is filled with what he called sexualized energy. Okay. And his use of sexuality is very different than how we interpret sexuality. Okay.
Right.
We came from a sperm and an egg. It was a sexual act that created us. It was sexual energy that created us. So of course, we're sexual human beings. Okay. And out of that life force, that energy, okay, that's what moves us forward to help us grow and live. We all have the survival instinct. We all have the death instinct, okay? And we need others to survive. So what Freud did is he created that dependency in his office through psychoanalysis. So when somebody came in with severe symptoms, he said, talk, free associate. And he let the person just talk through whatever they were going through. And you can say anything in his office. You could say your dreams, your wishes, your fantasies, things that people didn't talk to with other people in their lives in a daily basis. So he helped people start to talk as a way of curing whatever it was that was bothering them. Okay. And it was about, he discovered the unconscious. Okay. And what is the unconscious? Okay. The unconscious is whatever it is that we don't remember right away, but comes to us with different cues. For instance, if I said to you, close your eyes right now, okay? If everybody just closes their eyes, and I said, think about when you were 5 years old. What memory comes to you? Just those cues would bring back memories that were before in your unconscious. So not everyone is in touch with their unconscious, but what he also discovered is ways to get in touch with your unconscious. And one of those ways was dreams. Every night we go to sleep, we're unconscious. And during that period of time, sometimes we wake up and we remember we had a dream. And the dream doesn't always stick with us. It's like for 5 minutes, we might remember the dream and then it dissipates. It just goes right back in the unconscious. And sometimes you remember you had a dream, but you don't remember anything about it. But you're stuck with this, confusion about, I dreamt something. Or you actually did dream something and you remember it somewhat. And you go, wow, that was so weird. However, if you sit with the dream and you start to play with the concepts in the dream and the feelings in the dream, so much comes out. And it's a road to really remembering. Okay. What Freud believed through psychoanalysis is that what we don't remember, we repeat. So when somebody is really anxious, and there's no reason to be anxious in the present, you kind of wonder, where's that anxiety coming from? Why is crossing the street so anxious, anxiety provoking that you don't want to cross the street? Everybody knows you have to cross the street to get to the other side. So why would somebody have so much difficulty doing that? Okay, that's something that has nothing to do with the present, but may have to do with a past experience that now makes you so afraid of crossing the street. Okay, so what Freud gave us back then was the road to the unconscious. Okay, and what he also gave us is many, many concepts, and how we understand the human mind. And his process of doing it was very traditional. There was a couch in his office. He would ask people to lie down because lying down was the position of sleep, as close to the unconscious as you can be. And also lying down, you weren't influenced by the face of another. You really were left having somebody in the room, but not influenced by all the facial expressions. And with Freud, even though there was this concept that he was a blank slate, he was far from a blank slate. Okay, people knew who Freud was. Okay, his neighbors sent their children to Freud, their adult children. So he wasn't a blank slate. In fact, his daughter was the one who greeted people at the door and invited them for tea. And sometimes the sessions were even kept in his backyard. And sometimes he would do psychoanalysis when he was on vacation, walking in the mountains. So that concept of the blank slate is really false in that way. What isn't false, though, is that he kept quiet and let the patient speak and helped the client move forward with whatever it was they were free associating with. Back then, he did treatment every single day, and it didn't go on for years. Perhaps the longest treatment was every day for 11 weeks with Dora. Okay, and today we have this concept that people lie down on the couch, they're there for many, many years, never leave. It's not true. Okay, the difference is people don't come as frequently. So when you only come once a week, like psychodynamic treatment today, is it doesn't allow for the unconscious to stay present in the conscious, because whatever conflict you're going to goes under with everyday life. If you saw the analyst every single day, there is come to treatment, the more you can get to the material that's getting in the way of you functioning. Okay, so going to the present in psychodynamic treatment, okay, it's fascinating how we're not in the same room today. Okay, it's like we're trying to do what Freud did in person on a screen today. I don't know how many clinicians today can see people in their offices due to COVID, okay? Or due to distance. Somebody will start treatment, they move away. And how do they continue? Do they go to somebody else and start with someone new? Or can they continue with the person that they've developed a trusting relationship with? Okay, so today, psychodynamic treatment is based on Freud's free association, the appreciation of the unconscious, the understanding that conflict, internal conflict is real, okay? Yet it's not as intense. And the transference that Freud talks about, the transference is the relationship that's developed between the patient and the analyst that's not based on reality. It between the patient and the analyst as much as it is the projection of all the past people who've influenced the patient, and it comes on the analyst. And in the here and now of the therapy or the analysis, you can look at what's that all about. You can feel it through. You know, a patient comes in and they're screaming their heads off at you and you're going, what did you do? But somehow that patient is experiencing something and trying to resolve it in a different way by bringing it into you. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm thinking an example of that today would be a patient will come in and say, all you analysts want is money. Okay. Yes. And I'm paying you and you're just sitting there doing nothing. Okay. And I'm going, this is a low fee patient. If I really just wanted money, I wouldn't be seeing him, right? But there's something about him seeing me as this greedy, making him poor because he's coming to treatment. And when you really start to delve into that, it was like, well, who made him feel poor internally? It's not about the money. You know, what happened with his parents that made him feel like they were taking so much from him and he was getting very little in return. So in terms of today and psychodynamic, most people today can't afford the time or the money for everyday psychoanalysis. Okay? Most people may make 45 minutes in their week to come in and just let loose, you know, let themselves really pay attention to themselves. And so the treatment takes longer because they don't have the luxury of working on it every single day. If somebody does, you can see the unfolding of who they are and them getting more together. But symptoms come from conflict. Okay. And I don't know how much your audience knows about psychoanalysis, so I'm going to give a few little different things about it, okay? There's a structure that Freud felt was in the brain, okay? It's not, it doesn't have a physical place, but he said there are three things that every human being goes through. There's, in the life force, there's something called the id, the ego, and the superego. And we're all born with id. Id is pure instinct. It's pure pleasure seeking, okay? And when we're born, all we want is to have tremendous pleasure, the pleasure of eating, the pleasure of being held. And then something happens in that pleasure that as you become more aware of the world as an infant, as a young baby, okay, the pleasure is not always there when you want it. Your mother's not always going to pick you up just because you start to cry. And there's going to be a little bit of space. And in that space, something happens in the baby that the baby has to grow and adjust. Okay. And so there's something more than the pleasure and the dependency that develops. Okay. There's this need to master the world. Okay. And so we develop an ego, which is something that modulates between the pleasure principle and the realities of life and what you have to adjust to. And then what happens in that development is we also develop a sense we have to live with other people. We're not the only people in the world. And we have to not kill the person who's getting in our way or bang them over the head. So we have to learn how to modulate our drives to be me, and say, wow, we're we. And I have to live with others. And so it's like there's a super ego that says we can't kill another person. That develops in time. That develops around maybe 3 or 4, it starts developing. When you're, you know, your parents say you can't bite or you can't grab the toy from another child, okay? So all that, there's so much conflict around, but I want, and that person wants, is there enough for both of us? Can I still have if the other person is around? Okay. And what if my mother isn't here to give it to me? Am I able to take it for myself? Okay. So there's tons that we all have to maneuver through in order to survive. And we all have conflicts about how to do it. And we learn how to really work through those conflicts. But there are some times where it's harder than others. And it's like you're told to respect your elders, for instance. Okay. And what if that elder is doing something you don't like? Do you tell the elder? Or do you just do what the elder tells you to do? Because if you don't, that elder is not going to like you too much. And can you live with the fact that the elder may not like you too much? Okay. So Freud, what he really began, and we continue as we move forward in life, is really trying to tap into all the dynamics of the human mind and life and our hearts and our bodies, and try to, it's really analyzing the psyche. And how do you really define the psyche? It's like, is there another word for the psyche? And in German, it means soul. And so it's really trying to tap into everybody's soul. And so that's, one way. Psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy is one way of helping people begin to be familiar with their soul.
Right. Beautiful. I think that was very simply explained and clarified, like as we said, that there are so many misconceptions about it, like right from how much time does it take and is it too expensive. So I think those doubts to a larger extent must have been clarified right now, I think, for everyone. And great the way you explained about the id, ego and superego, because maybe most of the audience might not be aware of it, or maybe they weren't aware of it. And now I think through that simple example, it has become so easy for everyone to at least get the concept across. So my further question would be, what do you think are some important features of this contemporary psychoanalytic psychotherapy?
We live in contemporary times, right?
Absolutely.
Well, in contemporary times, I think what's most important is listening.
Right.
Of being really open to why a person is coming into your office, even if it's on the screen. What is it that they want to do in the therapy or the analysis? What are they hoping to gain from it? Okay. And to be very realistic about keeping the frame. Today, because so much of the work is done not on the couch in your office, some people can be on their couch lying down at home. I know I've had people during COVID who wanted privacy, who sit in their closet, who sit in the laundry room, who go to the bathroom to have their session just so they have privacy and can focus. So it's far from the couch, but it's allowing for the intimacy. It's allowing for a person to be comfortable enough to really talk openly. And it's very scary for people to be honest with themselves in front of another person. Because they've often been told, don't think that, don't say that. That'll get you into trouble. And in the office, because it's just talking, there's no consequences except to explore. And so in contemporary treatment, it's really important to set the atmosphere to allow someone to feel safe and not to repeat as the analyst or as the therapist any way of repressing or censoring what the patient says. Words are very different than action. And all we have in the treatment is words.
Right. Okay.
That's how we connect.
Beautiful. So, how would you say that there are these different kinds of psychotherapies, right? And as we were just talking about it, that what is the reason somebody comes to a therapist or an analyst in psychoanalysis? So, if you have to highlight, like, are there any specific differences or similarities? Because what I hear right now is there is obviously some goal, maybe knowingly and unknowingly. Some people are aware of their goal, some people may not be aware of their goal, but there is some hidden goal with which somebody walks to us or a psychotherapist, right? So what are some of the similarities and some of the differences between the psychoanalysis approach or psychoanalytic psychotherapy and the other modern psychotherapies, which were developed much later.
Okay. So out of Freud's work and the process of psychoanalysis, people understood that the human mind also has so many different ways of engaging with. And Freud's idea of repetition, we repeat what we don't remember. We also repeat because we have patterns. Patterns that after a while become habits, and that our neurons and our internal life keeps repeating, because if we're so used to doing the same thing over and over again, we keep doing it, and it's very hard to change that. Okay, so if somebody, I think we froze. Are you there? I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, yes, you're very much audible.
Okay. Because you froze, I was a little concerned. So this is part of contemporary work. We don't always see each other on the screen. We don't always hear every word we say or the other person says. Real, very real. And it's how to fill in the blanks too, or just, recognize it and check it out. But going back to other therapies, we now have CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or dialectic behavior therapy. Okay? And these are offshoots of what we learn from knowing that there's many different ways we can get into helping people deal with their symptoms. Okay? Symptom relief happens much quicker than long-term therapy, where you deal with the issues that have built those symptoms. Okay. Today, often because of the financial piece, because of the time restraints, a lot of people want a fast cure. Okay. We can get rid of symptoms because we can change patterns in behavior. That's part of behavioral therapy. Okay. But behavior alone is only the surface. And behavior comes back often if we don't get under the surface. So sometimes today people will be saying, I can't sleep at night. I'm having nightmares. We repeat what we don't remember. And so you can get medication for sleep. You can go to a sleep clinic today. Okay. And you don't even have to think about the nightmares, because if you take medication, you sleep. Okay. But eventually the medication won't work. And the nightmares will return until we really look at what's going on that's creating those nightmares. And that's where the psychodynamic or psychoanalysis comes back. Okay. So if somebody's interested just in symptom relief, there's plenty of short-term therapies. Okay. And a lot of people, that's all they're interested in. It's like going to the doctor when you have a cold, they'll give you medicine and you're all better. Okay. And today we have so many more medicines for psychotropic medication and that we didn't have in Freud's day. Okay. And they do help. So the use for psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy is something different than it once was. Okay. In terms of it's really exploring and really getting to know yourself way more than symptom relief.
Right. Okay. Okay. So would you want to let us know also about how the entire process of psychotherapy in psychoanalysis works? Because as you right now mentioned a lot of things, I guess a lot of misconceptions were thrown out of our minds. And that's when we realized that, oh, it's not something which is only predominantly something to do with past, nor it has to be something where somebody has to necessarily lie down on the couch, or an analyst has to sit behind the couch. So I think these were the few things which people were aware. Like when the moment psychoanalysis as a word is uttered, I think these are the things which people have first in their mind, right? So how the process of psychoanalytic psychotherapy works in brief, if you can explain it to us.
Okay, I can do it perhaps through a case.
Oh, that will be brilliant too. Yes.
Okay, for instance, a young Christian man, single, maybe age 26. Okay, he came into therapy because he was so anxious. Okay, new to New York, originally from California, and he was looking for a job. And while he was looking for a job, he was so anxious that his girlfriend couldn't tolerate his anxiety because he'd have blow-ups, and he was looking at porn, and she couldn't tolerate him. And he was devastated that he lost his girlfriend, and he didn't have work. And what he did is he was so anxious, he would talk a mile a minute, and he started drinking to self-medicate. And he was a mess. He started gaining weight, and he knew this was happening to him. And he was very upset with it. So that's what he came in. He had no desire to go into his history or talk about his parents or anything like that. He just wanted to get fixed. He wanted to have a job and a new girlfriend and stop drinking so much. Okay. So in the session, what he would present is this very jittery guy who could hardly sit down, who had to pace in the sessions. And I would be there, calm in my chair, just listening to him. And for the first few sessions, you know, it was like he couldn't sit still. And I don't remember what it was. At one point, he just says, you know what? I don't know what you're doing to me, Doc, but I had a dream last night. And he told me the dream. And he woke up. That's all that he remembered. And when he shared that dream, that was the first time he could sit down on the couch and stop pacing. And he started to talk about his sister. And it was a younger sister, and the memories that came flooding to him about his sister and the dynamics in the family, that was the first time the symptoms started to subside. And so there's something about bringing back memory that brings back a part of oneself. We're made of everything we experienced in life. So that when we give permission to remember who we are, we don't have to be so nervous. We could accept who we are. We have a grounding for who we are. And that's how he started. Today he has a full-time job working remotely, but he's back living in his parents' home. And he's devastated that he had to give up his apartment because of coronavirus and have to go back in his childhood room. And hopefully one day he'll come back to New York because that's what he really wants to do. But he's still in treatment on the screen now. And just once a week. But there's something about that connection that's very important to him, to have a place to just talk through things so he doesn't have to go scream at his parents or his sister or his brother or quit his job.
Right.
It's a container
mechanisms.
Now.
Particularly, is it like using the defense mechanisms?
The defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms, it's an interesting thing with how to make that simple. Defense mechanisms protect our pain.
True.
Okay. For him, not having a job, not having a girlfriend, he was in tremendous pain. And the way he was trying to deal with his pain is through the alcohol, is through blowing up at other people, is through pornography, because he didn't know how to contain the pain. But there's something about being able to address the pain in therapy that gives room not to act out destructively, but to really respect the pain is real and somebody can hold you through it so that you can really resolve it and move internally.
And I think most of these concepts are also applicable in our day-to-day life. Like the other day, I remember we discussing with lots of them who mentioned that they also do use even a lot of defense mechanisms in our day-to-day life, isn't it? And many of them, while they are primitive, some of them may not be, but it does help us to, if used constructively, to prevent us from the anxiety that this entire mind might be going through. So what are the other, some of the concepts that you would, bring us to our notice that we might be using in our day-to-day life also, which psychoanalysis does talk about?
Okay. I think how, it's so funny, I think it's so immersed in our everyday life.
True.
You know, we call each other neurotic. We try to rationalize our behavior. We say, oh, that's Freudian. You know, the Freudian slips. Why did you say that? Was that a slip? You know, what's underneath the slip? It's become part of our daily interaction with each other.
Right.
I think we catch each other to be more honest in a way that maybe years ago we didn't, you know. So unconsciously, we have all incorporated being analytical with ourselves and with others, you know.
Yes.
So I'm thinking in everyday life, defense mechanisms, I want to be clear, are necessary. You know, there's coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, they're intertwined, but we all have defenses. We have to, because otherwise we couldn't survive. You know, I'm thinking even developmentally, an infant, you can't have an infant be naked. Eventually they have to have clothing. Our defense mechanisms are psychic clothing. You know, we need to not always be exposed to everything. It's dangerous. Absolutely. Anxiety is real. You know, anxiety is kind of our inner way of realizing there's a danger out there. You know, what is it? Let's deal with that. How do we protect ourselves from it? How do we make it less dangerous?
Yeah. So I guess these defense mechanisms are one of the ways of coping mechanisms in itself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yes. Great. And what could be some of the best techniques or the methods that you perhaps must have seen in your practice of so many years and that you would recommend? Because I'm sure somewhere even a lot of people watching this and attending this might be wanting to consider even being a psychoanalyst, right? So what you would like to suggest to them, and maybe even, you know, help us understand the techniques and the methods that are still in use, and some of the techniques which probably are not in use as we talk about psychoanalysis now, that is today.
Okay. I think the most important ingredient is able to sit in a room with another person and recognize the person needs to talk. And whatever they say, it's very important to not be judgmental, but to stay curious.
Right.
To really help the person accept oneself, and to, as the analyst, to recognize if something in yourself gets in the way of listening, to pay attention to that. That's called the counter transference. In the room, transferring the patient transfers to you all the feelings they feel, but in response, the analyst has all kinds of feelings about what's being shared. And where that takes the analyst is important for the analyst to really work through, because it's informative of what is going on in the treatment. But the most important ingredient is accepting the patient for who they are, not having an agenda for the patient. The patient leads the way, and you are their witness, you're their passenger, and you're saying what you see as they're driving.
Right. True. I think that was very beautifully said, that as a therapist or as a psychologist, you are a passenger for that person who is coming into you for some assistance. And again, while you're going to be there for that person, you are not supposed to be, and you're not being judgmental, but just curious enough to understand about the other person and learn more about the other person.
Right.
Lovely. Okay, so
You
some of the
froze
questions.
again.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I think since it's raining here, I might be having some internet issues, so please excuse me for that. But yeah, I'm going to be going to the chat box now, because some of the questions we have in the chat box and some of the questions I have received even in the chat box privately. So let me come back to those questions and ask you for the same. Okay, so the first question that I can see is, how common is it for a psychoanalyst to misinterpret the dreams?
Never try to interpret the dream for the patient.
Perfect.
The patient knows best
Right.
what the interpretation is. For instance, if I say the word music, what's your association?
Okay.
You'll have your own associations to the word music. I'll have my own associations to the music. I may, when a patient brings in the word music, I may think of John Lennon. Okay?
What do you think?
That's me as
Okay.
the analyst. Okay.
Right.
You may think as soon as I said music, what came to you?
Exactly. That's what you will ask the
Okay.
client.
Right. Okay. So the client will have their own associations. It's their unconscious we're working with. So that's where we help the patient. Okay. We can't make the interpretation. We can help with the map of the dream. For instance, what do you think the music was about?
Right. Right.
You know, we also want to know what happened before you went to sleep last night. What were you anticipating today? So we help the patient remain curious about their own dream, but we don't know the patient as well as the patient knows themselves.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So I think that also just makes me add to this, that we have this common, again, misinterpretation that, the psychoanalyst does a lot of work of bringing it to the unconscious level, the conscious level from the unconscious level. And the curious thing part is what happens later. Like, how can it further assist in somebody's personality development as well? That's also one of the very similar questions we have, that so far psychoanalysis helps us to release our past issues. And I think Ms. Leah did talk about that. How does it help us to grow or develop our personality?
Okay, excellent question. Okay, we're going to grow no matter what. Okay, when people understand themselves, okay, they have more appreciation of themselves. So it releases the energy to keep growing. Okay,
Right.
Insight itself isn't healing. What's also healing is the reparative relationship between the analyst and the patient. Someone who will actually listen to them in a way that they aren't interfering with their growth.
Right.
Okay. So just being in the presence of another is supportive for that person to keep growing. And what they learn in that session is how to also keep supporting themselves after the treatment is over. Okay, because they've learned not to judge what they're experiencing as much as work with what they're experiencing.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that very well answers the question, that how it hides very, I would say subtly, but contributes to the growth of one's personality development, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the next thing that I'm going to be coming at is the question that says, so in psychoanalysis, okay, this is interesting. Does therapist just listens or uses paraphrasing, clarification, interpretations also of what the client says?
Okay. I'm someone who can't keep my mouth shut sometimes. Okay. So it's interactive more than just quiet sitting back and saying, okay, 45 minutes, time's up, session's over. It's impossible to do that.
True.
Okay. And it wouldn't help anybody. It would create more anxiety, actually, and more distance. Okay. So, of course, when someone speaks, you don't want to interfere or intrude on what they're saying. But sometimes when you're listening, something might not quite fit. And that's an opportunity for you to check it out with the patient or the client or the person in the room with you. Like, can you say that once more? I don't get it. What do you make of that? And that helps then expand their ability to communicate and understand themselves as well. But we certainly don't just sit in silence.
Right.
Okay. And you know, I think the longer I work with patients, the more I realize how much I love them as people. And there's this pure, you know, enjoyment that happens in every session because you have a relationship that's built on trust. And they've given you so much of themselves in sharing that
Absolutely.
there's a real privilege of just being present.
Right.
That comes through. That's
So
not
beautiful.
silent.
Right. And I think this is not even learned skill, isn't it? It's something which is, you cannot really learn this particularly. You need to have that within you to really have that empathetic, you know, way of approaching your clients and still be very curious, as you said, non-judgmental. Right. Okay, there is another very big message that I'm going to be reading for you is, as we know, males and females have different thinking patterns, also different ways of coping mental issues. Like if we take example of depression, male tend to avoid the symptoms and engage in alcohol abuse as a coping strategy because of the social stigma that a man should be strong and never reveal his emotions, whereas women would seek help or would open up. So are there different strategies to treat them in psychoanalysis?
I love the question. And I love it because it really helps look at how super ego develops because of cultural norms.
Exactly.
You know, a man is supposed to hide their emotions, and women are like Freud said, hysterical. You know, they feel so much more, and you just accept those stereotypes. In terms of strategy, it's the same. It's just being in the room, letting the person explore what they want to explore. If someone wants to be strong and hide their emotions, it worked for them. So why would they want to change that? Okay.
Right.
Is that their agenda or the analyst's agenda? If someone always cries when they're, you know, they're starting to feel something, that's who they are. So it's like, why would you change that? Is that their agenda? You know, so it's like there's something that happens in treatment where all that changes. The woman becomes more cognitively oriented and integrates the intellect, you know, and the thinking, and the man integrates the feeling. It just happens when you become more whole with yourself. And how you present it in public, that's a different story. The grounding is
Right.
within you.
Right. I remember one of Freud's quotes, which says that out of our vulnerabilities will come our strength. I think that is something which I just could associate while you were explaining this.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to the next question now. That is, oh, by the way, someone is saying that thank you so much for a wonderful session. And I just wanted to ask, what has been your experience with clients? Does insight suffice in healing the pain? Or do you also recommend the clients later to learn some cognitive or else behavioral strategies in addition to gaining insights, even after the therapy is perhaps over?
Huh. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. Even during therapy, people do things at the same time. They may take medication. They may go to a group. They may do EMDR, as a way of trying to work out trauma. They may want to go to AA if they're drinkers, Alcoholics Anonymous. So whatever helps them, by all means, that's their right to do, I'm
Right.
thinking specifically when people have addictions, it's so helpful when they go to support outside of psychoanalysis.
Right. Okay. I guess just to add into what you said, shouldn't it be more like what helps clients, like if they are very willing to learn some of the cognitive and behavioral techniques too in order to deal with their day-to-day challenges? It's client's wish and willingness. And then as a therapist, you would not be going very fundamentalist that no, you should do this or you should not do that.
Right.
So I guess that's something which we can definitely recommend our clients, and that's what I thought I could add into that.
Yeah.
So brilliant. And okay, there comes another question which says that today psychoanalysis compares itself with rival psychotherapies and theories, behavioral or cognitive psychotherapy, systematic rational psychotherapy. Psychoanalysis situates amongst this, and in particular, can we say that psychoanalysis is a psychotherapy? Yes. And if it is, in what sense? Okay.
Wow. Okay. I don't think the therapies have to be in conflict with each other.
Right.
I think different people approach healing in the way they need to. And they could all be intertwined. You could learn from each one of them. Okay. And some people have a preference one over another. And that's okay. Thank goodness we have choices.
Right.
Okay. And as a clinician, I think it's important to recognize which one feels right to you, which is authentically the way you feel you can work.
Right. I think I also add this while explaining it to my students that the way, for example, if anybody has fever, not necessarily only one medicine would suit that person. You might take different approaches, like somebody goes for antibiotics, somebody goes for homeopathy, and different kinds of medications. At the end, the goal is that the patient should recover and should get help. So I guess that is how all these therapies should be complementing the client, because ideally the therapy is meant for the client is not meant for the therapy. So yes, definitely. And let's move to the next question that says, do psychoanalysts use other schools of therapy like behavioral or NLP? So I guess that's something which we briefly discussed. Would you like to add something more onto this?
I think the more you understand as treatment possibilities, as an analyst, of course you can incorporate that if you feel it's going to be helpful to the treatment.
Right.
Nothing is pure anymore. You know, it's not like we have to, you know, be a particular way and this is the only way.
Right.
If we do that, we miss opportunities for the client or the patient. So
Right.
it's to stay open.
Right.
What's going to work with the patient?
Best.
You know?
Okay. Another question, and I think we will just take another last question before I open up as a video, but I guess most of them have asked these questions. That we talk about in our day-to-day life also the word or this concept called ego. Yeah. And in psychoanalysis as well, we talk about the word ego, that is in the ego, superego. So how do you differentiate between this day-to-day used word, that is ego / attitude, versus what psychoanalysis talks about ego? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking if I can, we talk about, oh, he has a big ego.
Right.
Okay. A big ego is he thinks a lot of himself. He's conceited or she's conceited.
Right.
That's not what ego is. Okay. That's the
Right.
vernacular use of ego. Ego is a construct or a word that Freud invented or, you know, used as something goes on between regulating and modulating and trying to help a person deal with the conflicts based on their desire to, for instance, you're hungry, okay, and you don't have any food in your fridge, but your next door neighbor has food in their fridge and you know that, okay? So if you were to go to your next door neighbor, break into their house and grab their food, that would not be acceptable. That's the id working, okay? The
Right.
ego then would recognize, I'm hungry. I can't go to my neighbor's house.
Right.
What can I do to feed myself if there's no food for me in my own house? Okay, that's the ego working out the need to eat. And you're going to figure out a way that works where you're not going to hurt anybody in the process.
Right.
That's ego. Not you got a big ego. You're only thinking of yourself.
Right. Right. Definitely. Okay, so I guess that really covers up the questions that I have received in the chat box. I'm just going to quickly take a minute's time to ask anybody if they would like to ask a direct question and grab the opportunity to ask Ms. Leah on video itself. Is there anybody who would like to ask any questions? I think you have explained it so beautifully and well that the questions have been mostly addressed and the clarity has really come in. So, well, I think then we are reaching towards the end of our webinar. It's, yes, for us, okay, there is one question. Fine.
Okay.
I'm just going to be taking this last question, if you are okay with that, Ms. Leah.
Sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So I think you also might be able to see this. I can see a lot of great names popping up there, that from its start, psychoanalysis, including Fenichel, Benfeld, Risch, Fromm, and others, developed a Freudian Marxist current among both analysts and philosophers, which still flourishes today. How should we view today the relation amongst Marxists, and psychoanalysts? Okay.
Fabulous question that would take more than an hour to respond to.
I guess that will call for another webinar with you.
Well, I'm thinking the person who may have asked the question would probably be a good person to give that webinar, because it really means you know something about Marxism. And there's something important to explain about that I would not be the expert for.
Okay. So yes, Ms. Snehal Pawar, whatever, I guess that's question which has come from her. Would you like to add something while everyone might share their opinions or their comments on the same?
Okay. I just want to say this is such an interesting format because I don't see anybody. And I'm feeling like the patient on the couch who's just free associating into
Right.
air.
You have like almost so many people lying behind you on a couch.
But I don't see anyone but you. So, but it's nice to know that I'm speaking to people in India, and I hope one day to come and really see everybody, you know. It's a dream to go. Yeah.
Definitely. I think let's make your dream come true soon. Once the COVID settles, you will be definitely here, and we can have some of the, again, live sessions now, not live in terms of a virtual live, but where you will be able to talk to everyone in presence. So once again, thank you so much, everyone. Of course, without the audience, the webinar wouldn't have made so much of fun and knowledgeable, because your questions really made a lot of difference, I would say. And of course, a big thanks to Miss Leah. Thank you so much, Leah, for coming on board and delivering this beautiful session. You can already see, I'm sure by yourself, that there are so many thank yous for you in the chat box. Everyone is really thrilled and happy to hear from you. And I'm sure they would be one fine day also willing to see you live in India.
I would love to see everybody in New York too. So if you ever visit, give me a shout out.
Definitely, that's so true. Brilliant. So thank you, and I wish everyone a very happy weekend ahead. And I hope to see you for our future webinars from the series Let's Hear It from the Expert. Once again, thank you so much, and have a good evening ahead.
Thank you.